Hello and welcome to this walkthrough of the New Cambridge Shakespeare edition of Othello by William Shakespeare. Your copy of the play, of course, will not look quite like this. This is an online version. Your copy will look much more like this, I imagine, which is the newest edition. It has, as you will have probably worked out, got lots and lots of juicy stuff at the beginning. You've got interesting things on the context, and this has all been new and expanded in the most recent edition. But when you come to the actual copy of the text itself, which we will be using, you'll see that it is laid out exactly the same way as this online version that I'm using. So you can write notes in there, having kind of listened to me. You'll also notice that if I just kind of draw your attention to the notes down the bottom here, these notes are exactly the same as the notes that I've got here on the right hand side of the screen. Okay, so you can refer to these on in your actual text, or you can just refer to them actually in the video itself. Good. Right, so let's get underway. Now, what do I mean by a walkthrough? Well, essentially, as I see it, my job here is to take you through the text effectively line by line, scene by scene, but I'm not going to offer you an awful lot of actual kind of critical opinion on the text. I might point to the odd bit of repetition. I might maybe just make a suggestion that something could be worth thinking about in a little bit more detail. And I might say, you know, and then why not think about this when you're discussing it in class or when you're kind of compiling notes at home, whatever it might be. Okay, so we can get underway. We begin with Rodrigo and Iago. Now, they are right away, this is a sort of in media res, in the middle of things. We start right in the middle of an argument, effectively, between these two. Rodrigo, who is a gentleman of Venice, is saying, "Tush," which is just a kind of, you know, for goodness sake kind of thing. Never tell me. You don't say. You're not trying to tell me, are you? I can't believe it. I take it much unkindly. I think you have deceived me, and in a cruel way, Iago, that thou, Iago, who hast had my purse as if the strings were thine. In other words, you've had control of my money for some time now, to the point where effectively you're able to use my wallet as if it was yours, should know of this. What is this? Well, of course, this is a device used by Shakespeare to kind of immediately make us curious, and we don't know what this is. Iago, this is his first line. Now, Iago is essentially the antagonist in this play. He's got, in fact, I think more lines than Othello. In fact, he's got as many lines as many of the biggest characters in all of Shakespeare. So he's a significant figure and a really fascinating one. So he says splud, which we gather from the notes over here is actually a strong oath of its time. So think of any kind of strong swear word that you can think now and insert that. I won't say it here, obviously. But you will not hear me. You won't listen to me. If ever I did dream of such a thing, if ever I even imagined this would happen, abhor me, hate me, loathe me. Okay? Rodrigo says, "Thou toldst me, thou didst hold him in thy hate." You told me you hated him. How is it that you didn't kind of tell me of this? And then he just says, well, despise me if I do not. If I do not hate him, you can hate me. And then he starts to go in to his, I guess this is the first indication really of some of the motives that Iago might be having later on in the play. So it's really worth looking at quite closely. Once you've listened to this, you might then do some bit of work on it. Three great ones of the city. So we're talking about three significant figures, three kind of, I don't know, politicians, gentlemen, people who are high up anyway in the establishment, in personal suit, right? In personal suit. So they're making a case to him, in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, to make his lieutenant being Othello. In other words, they are directly saying to Othello, do you know what? We think Iago will make a really good lieutenant to you, which would be a military position. I don't know whether it's exactly the same as our lieutenant that we would have in the army now, but it's certainly something Iago really wants. and they off-cap to him. And I see this a bit like sort of political lobbying, really. They came up to Othello and they took off their hats in a sort of act of politeness and said, you know what, I really think Iago's going to make a great lieutenant. By the faith of man, says Iago, I know my price. I know what I am worth. I'm worth that role as lieutenant. Thank you very much. Well, it's worth just bearing in mind this word here, price, and this word worth, and that it's coming from Iago. It's worth just looking out, is all I would say, for the way in which he does often tend to define things in these kind of material terms. Himself, women, other people, anything that you're going to get. There's a very, very famous scene later on where he says, put money in thy purse to Roderigo, which means a lot more than actually just kind of get yourself ready in terms of ready cash. But we're back to Othello, as loving his own pride and purposes, so his own pomp, he's incredibly full of himself and kind of seems to enjoy showing off his opinions. This is Iago's position. Okay, so this is all obviously filtered through Iago. Notice at the moment we have not yet had Othello's name. It's worth working out and worth noticing when we first hear his name. Evades them, so he just brushes them aside, these people who are putting this case, and with a bombast circumstance, so this with a sort of kind of bombast circumstance, kind of full of puffed up rhetoric, lots and lots of hot air, effectively, in speeches that are stuffed with metaphors of war, military epithets, military metaphors and images, which is something you can make a decision about with Othello. Does he actually do this later on, or doesn't he? Are we being unfair in terms of our representation of him here before he's even come on stage? And in conclusion, at the end of it all, non-suits, so effectively rebuts and rebuffs the case made by these mediators, by these lobbyists for Iago. And he says, apparently Othello says to them, for certes, for sure, certainly, I have already chosen my officer. And very often you will find that at that point Iago, the actor playing Iago, will sort of mimic Othello's voice at this point, and kind of the sense of this kind of pomposity. And what was he? Just something to bear in mind here, that when you have a line that is only half a line, and what was he? So you've got 4 syllables there, and then the rest of the line is not extended. And you can see by the layout here that this is meant to be in blank verse, and as I'm sure you will do in class or will have done at some point, blank verse in Shakespeare means 10 syllables, and on the whole, and it's only a general thing, you tend to have the syllables stressed. Every second syllable is stressed. That's what blank verse means in relation to, just generally really, but particularly in relation to Shakespeare. So when you get a line that's not finished like this, usually it means a pause, it means some stage business, or it means potentially sometimes that the editor, that's just what they were left with, and they thought, well, this is the best decision we can make, we'll start again on this line. Forsooth, so truly, what was he? This guy who got this role, a great arithmetician. Like somebody basically, as we're going to go on and say this all the way through, he is a theorist. He is not a proper soldier. He's Michael Cassio, a Florentine, and apparently Florentines, we learn from the notes, are essentially, they're as good as kind of bankers or accountants. This is not somebody who should be fighting a battle. A fellow almost damned in a fair wife. Bit of a mysterious line that. I'm just going to leave you to read the notes if you're interested. Essentially, it's saying he kind of couldn't keep a beautiful wife. Okay, fine, but there are some problems with that in terms of the way that he's later represented as quite a smoothie, actually, Cassio. But anyway, maybe that's for Iago's purposes at that point in the play. That never set a squadron in the field. So this guy, he's saying to Roderigo, has never actually been in battle with a proper troop of soldiers. He doesn't even know how to divide up a battle any more than a spinster would. Now that would be an unmarried woman. It would be, at that particular point in time, a spinster would just be a term. It would be an epithet that you would apply to a woman who was unmarried. We don't use it very often at all now, actually, and if we did, it would probably be, it would have kind of quite negative connotations, I think. We'd see it as sort of, kind of bit of a sexist term, I suppose, really, unless the bookish theoric. And so, he doesn't know the division of battle unless it's in theory, basically. And in that case, well, the togaed consuls can propose as masters. So the people who just walk around pontificating about battles and have never been in battles, in togas. This is an image of a kind of Roman sort of, I suppose, a kind of a sort of Roman politician suggesting things about battle who's never actually been into battle. Mere prattle without practice is all his sort. He's all talk and no action. But he, sir, he says to Rodrigo, had the election. He got the job. And I, of whom his eyes, this is Othello's eyes, had seen the proof at Rhodes, at Cyprus. So Othello has seen me fighting in Rhodes and in Cyprus and on other battlegrounds, other grounds, Christian and heathen. So Iago would be talking from the point of view of being a Christian himself, or from a Christian background. How much of a believer he is will be something you could debate later on. Othello is almost certainly Christian, but seems to have taken on the Christian faith from some other faith, so that's worth knowing as well. So as far as we're concerned, a heathen would be anybody in this context who is not Christian. So, and in this particular era, I guess that where the play is set in, this Christian culture of Venice would be fighting against those that are other, if you like. Must be lead and calm. So Iago is saying, I must be lead and calm. Now, to be lead and calm basically is where basically a great big ship comes past you with a big sail and takes all your wind. Yes, that's the image there. By debtor and creditor. Who's the debitor and creditor? That person, like effectively by a sort of nobody who's not much more of a banker, really, effectively. Goes back to this idea here. This countercaster. I would say that in the modern idiom as something like a bean counter. He, in good time, is almost like, just like that, effectively. That's the way I see that little phrase there. Must his lieutenant be? He gets the job of lieutenant. And I, God bless the mark, his moorships ancient. Rather interesting, this. His moorships is probably a play on worship. This idea that, your worship would be a term of respect. Moorship. Well, there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of interesting discussion you can have about the word moor, because in some contexts you could see this as kind of quite neutral and talking about a North African culture, I suppose. But the way that he uses it, he's always talking about him as the Moor, which has a kind of racial element to it, probably, and is therefore probably actually critical of him. Okay, just so there is a bit of contempt in this. And ancient is almost kind of, there is disgust in that. Ancient is essentially nothing more than a kind of standard bearer, really. And Rodrigo actually seems to kind of go with this. He says, by heaven, I would rather be his hangman. It's almost like he's gone with Iago's line and he's kind of in with Iago now, and he's saying, yeah, I mean, God, I'd rather have killed him. I'd rather kill him. Let's kill him, sort of thing. Although not literally, as you'll scuff. Rodrigo's actually pretty wet. Why, says Iago, there's no remedy. It is the curse of service. This is what it's like. This is what it's like. This is what it's like when you are in service to somebody else. Preferment, so this is promotion, goes by letter and affection, which I would suppose, and again in modern terms, not particularly modern terms, but you hopefully get the idea, the sort of old boys network, the idea of kind of people high up in society looking out for one another, not by the old gradation. In other words, that would be merit, working your way up, stage by stage, grade by grade, where each second stood heir to the first. Yes, so you're kind of climbing up a ladder, if you like. That's not what happens, he's saying. It's all done by kind of a nod and a wink and nudge, and, yeah, come on, Cassio, you're in. Now, sir, be judge yourself. You judge it, whether I am, in any just term, am a fine to love them all. Do you honestly think, given everything that I've said, that I am, in any sense, predisposed to actually love them all? And there's kind of, again here, probably a bit of a pause left for Rodrigo to kind of come straight in here. He says, I would not follow him then. And that's where we're going to end this first part. So that is the end of Act 1, Scene 1, Part 1. And now, as you can see, we've got just up to line 40. And from the rest, as we go on through, I should be able to cover about 100 lines in each of our videos. So this is just more of an introductory one, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you very much.